is Grechishkin. I'm performing this informative speech for the 2021 NEITOC tournament. The mind-numbing boredom of quarantine and the isolation caused by COVID has caused all of us to turn to new hobbies or readopt hobbies of the past in search of any entertainment we can get. Who hasn't seen a social media post about someone engaging in a political debate, investing in stocks, or trying their very hardest to match the newest TikTok dance? However, there's one phase that hasn't made a comeback, and yet deserves a second look. It's about time we all don our polyester leisure suits and gold chains as we get ready to jungle boogie through the groovy sound of the 1970s. Disco music. By embracing disco as a form of entertainment while we attempt to avoid any Saturday night fevers during this pandemic, we can better understand its unique cultural relevance and see that you and I will survive all this hot stuff. The music we identify as disco today first emerged in the early 1970s, as the groups of the 50s and 60s like the Beach Boys or the Monkees gradually began to be replaced by the fresh sound of groups like ABBA or the Bee Gees. Born out of exclusive, membership-only clubs throughout the US and Europe, the group disco catered to was secretive and stayed out of the public eye. But soon, mainstream insight into these exclusive venues sparked the disco inferno in the United States that we know and love today. In 1971, disco was televised for the first time ever through the Soul Train music and dancing show. And when music critic Vince Aletti began attending the dance club, The Loft, he was enamored with disco culture and was motivated to publish the first ever mainstream article about disco in the Rolling Stone, titled Discotheque Rock. At this point, everyone was saying, "I love the nightlife," resulting in Donna Summer, ABBA, and the Bee Gees topping charts and staying alive in our playlists this very day. This meant that small underground clubs could grow to accommodate large crowds, high-tech speakers, and of course, the classic disco ball. But from its conception, disco has fundamentally been an art form of resistance. The groups that laid the groundwork for disco stylistically actually came about after Hitler continually labeled any music created by non-white artists as a degenerate influence. This led French resistance groups to create hidden, underground discotheques, where this music could be celebrated and enjoyed in peace. The influence of the discotheque was even prominent within the USSR, where under Stalin's strict rule, dancing at disco clubs was still permitted. But there was no love train for disco, because soon, each dance had to have a reason for the dance submitted to the government, and the music had to be heavily censored before it could be played. We remember jazz for the way it amplified black artists in the 1920s, rock and roll as a rebellious movement against established norms in the 60s, and when we think of disco, we think of tacky, commercial, and mass-produced music. However, when we water down disco to this definition, it means that we miss out on the critical nuances of the genre and the impact it's had on our society at large. For starters, the voices of the most popular songs were less masculine, and for the first time, it was primarily women who were topping charts consistently. Additionally, the club setting the music meant that singers no longer had to water down their lyrics to make them radio-friendly, giving us classics like "Shake Your Booty" and "Do You Think I'm Sexy?" This focus on sexuality via music marked a dramatic departure from the past, where the few songs that didn't sweep sexuality under the rug focused entirely on the desire that women created in men. However, prominent female artists like Donna Summer re-centered this narrative, instead choosing to sing their songs about the empowerment women derive from embracing their own power and sexuality, causing singles like "Love to Love You Baby" to top charts for months at a time. Newfound empowerment disco fostered arose partially as a result of the time where the ERA was gaining traction, Roe v. Wade had just been decided, and Title IX was fastly becoming a new issue. And then this was then reflected in disco's fashion scene, where billowy pants and wrap dresses became the must-have pieces. Some feminists denounced disco fashion, labeling it as objectification of the female body, but designers and dancers alike defended their style. Much like the lyrics of the songs themselves, disco fashion was all about empowerment for the individual, giving clubgoers the opportunity to choose between styles that ran the gamut from modest to revealing. Additionally, disco inspired a newfound focus on men's fashion, where men were able to take on traditionally feminine styles and focus on their appearances free of judgment and stigma that had come along before. But don't stop till you get enough, because disco's expression engendered fresh and Black and Latinx artists in the scene who had previously been shunned and ignored artistically by society. Before disco, Black music was deemed primitive by mainstream white society. But disco was rooted in funk, which came from soul, and the persistent use of chanted rhythms and beats demonstrated how Black culture was actually what was making disco successful. The physical space disco occupied became a symbol of equality as well. Before the dawn of disco, most dancing was restricted to couples dancing between a male and a female only, and dancing between two males had actually been outlawed by New York City. However, disco shattered this norm and instead catered to large group dancing, giving LGBTQ individuals a safe space to dance together and enjoy the nightlife just like everybody else. Nightclubs like the Saint, or the Vatican of disco, took spaces and aesthetics that were traditionally heteronormative and turned them upon their heads, making unique safe spaces that were unlike any other in the decade. When examining the movement from today's perspective, it's clear that it still left its mark. For starters, by pioneering the 12-inch single, disco has, in turn, led to all the music we listen to today being slightly lengthier, giving us all more time to act as dancing queens. Additionally, disco gave rise to DJing as a common practice. Since dance culture was so critical to disco as a style, DJs had to use new and innovative techniques like listening ahead through headphones or remixing songs to keep their audiences engaged. But most importantly, disco created an inclusive environment unlike any other that was reflected in the nightclubs and the lyrics of the time. But soon, disco had its last dance. As it became perceived as popular, it led to an influx of white, working-class youth into the genre, which subsequently led to its gentrification. For the most part, queer and Black artists were able to retain their success, but small, independent record labels that used to be the hallmark of disco were soon overtaken by large conglomerates. The disco sucks movement came to represent the pinnacle of resentment from white rock fans. In late July of 1979, the largest known Death to Disco rally was hosted, where fans got a reduced ticket price to see the White Sox play if they brought a disco record to be burned and destroyed on the field. This led to a crowd of over 7,000 people attending, and burning the records of not only disco artists, but also successful queer and Black artists in general. As journalist Dave March reflected, young, white males were the most prominent group in attendance, because they were the ones who felt threatened by the success and opportunity that disco offered to marginalized communities. As the months went on, disco was aired less and less on the radio, and soon it gradually became replaced by the next big fad. We remember other genres of music for the impact they've left on our society, and yet disco doesn't get this same recognition. When we overlook disco as a meaningful form of empowerment, it means that we miss out on all the nuances of the genre and the way it's changed the entire world and the way we view the world as society. So, instead, it's about time we take a chance on meaningful disco music and realize that once we understand that we are family, it's all a boogie wonderland.